Dear friends, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this week. This is your channel, Gnosis Arizona. And what a crazy week this has been. The key topic of discussion this week was the rapture, which, well, we saw that it did not happen.
To my brothers and sisters who are watching for the rapture right now, don't give up hope. Don't give up hope. Jesus is still coming.
And as we approach the end of the day, it's looking like it's not happening, y'all. I'm not gonna lie, I feel foolish. I feel dumb.
It is September 23rd, and we're still here. And I'm fine with that.
But there was a key message behind the rapture that is very pervasive, and it has to do with 3 days of darkness. It is likely that you saw many videos of people buying candles, blessing candles, because only blessed candles would be the ones that would work during this 3 days of darkness, during this particular period. These 3 days of darkness, they come from some private revelations, some visions that were attributed to some mystics. One of them was a Catholic mystic. That mystic was Blessed Anne Maria Taigi, and they have been also attributed to Padre Pio. The Vatican has already clarified this. They have said Padre Pio has nothing to do with this, so fine. Anne Maria Taigi, what is that they're saying about these 3 days of darkness? This is a vision that she experienced of an intense period of tribulation. She perceived that this 3 days of darkness would constitute a period of impenetrable darkness, a period of pestilence. A demon-laden air was meant to be covering the earth during this particular time, and only blessed candles would be able to provide some light. And according to the prophecy that she experienced in a vision, well, during this time, people were meant to stay indoors. Anybody who connected to the rapture, anybody who did not, was taken away on the rapture, they would stay behind and they would stay trapped in these days of darkness. And their only way out was to pray fervently and make acts of contrition and repent for all of their sins. And if you ever walked outside or you looked outside and you heard the lamentations of people and you somehow made yourself exposed to whatever was happening on the outside, you would die. This is very aggressive. There is no doubt that this will cause fear in a lot of people. But the rapture did not happen. And this period of 3 days of darkness did not happen. But maybe we should say it has not happened yet. Because associated with this period of the 3 days of darkness, there is also this thing that speaks about an era of enlightenment of humanity. It has to do with something associated with the New Age. And on one hand, the rapture and the 3 days of darkness bring about a lot of fear, but on the other, this era of enlightenment for humanity, or of humanity, brings about a tremendous amount of hope and positiveness. But this area of enlightenment, maybe some people think that this is going to happen mechanically. It's going to happen just because. And would it? For us to be able to understand what will happen with these 3 days of darkness, what is required, what will happen for this era of enlightenment to manifest, we're going to have to comprehend 2 main things, because we must understand the principle of polarity, this thing called duality that we are also familiar with, and also the concept of matter. And this concept of duality, this principle of polarity, is one of the 7 Hermetic principles of manifestation. Now, I'm going to be sharing these principles with you, and I'm sharing them even though these principles are not Gnostic principles. All of these are good teachings that were given to humanity at the beginnings of the 20th century, but this is all pre-Gnosis. This is all part of the complement that is necessary to start moving those people who have a longing into understanding how these greater laws of the cosmos operate. And the first one of these 7 principles of manifestation is the principle of mentalism. The 3 people who write a book titled The Kabbalion, they identify themselves as the 3 initiates. They highlight these 7 principles and they say, relevant to the principle of materialism, they state the all is mind, the universe is mental. And the all is referred here as this concept that for a long time you and I and a lot of other people have had a very short understanding of, and it's this generic thing that we refer to as God. So if we were to say no more about this, the creator, this all, is mind, and the universe is a product of his mental substance. It is created within the mind of the all. But then there's also the principle of correspondence. And it is likely that you have heard this one before. This is the one that states that as above, so below. The things that happen above will correspond to the things that happen here. And what does that mean? That means that for us to understand how is it that it is up there, all that we must do is open ourselves to the understanding of the phenomena that happens here. So, for example, the hierarchies that we see in corporations, in the government, well, in a similar way, we have hierarchies of angelic and divine beings that all emerge or respond to a higher and higher intelligence. So this is the principle of correspondence. Then we have the principle of vibration. This principle states that nothing rests, that everything moves, everything vibrates. There is this principle of motion and activity that exists in all of creation. The next one is the principle of rhythm. And in the Kabbalion, it states everything flows out and in. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. And this principle of rhythm speaks to laws that we have already mentioned in many of our previous sessions. The law of return, the law of recurrence. Also, the law of the pendulum. There is also the principle of cause and effect. At our level, we may relate to this one easier with the word karma. But this principle of cause and effect that comes into existence the moment that the ray of creation exercises its very first condensation, it states, every cause has its effect, every effect has its cause, and everything happens according to law. Chance is but a name for law that is not recognized. There are many planes of causation, but nothing escapes the law. And the next one is the principle of gender. This one is not speaking about men and women. It is not speaking about masculine and feminine, but it is speaking about flows of energy, flows that are projected and flows that are received. Those that project are a masculine principle, and those that receive are passive, are a feminine principle. So we have a principle that is active and one that is passive, one that is emitting and one that is receiving. And this principle states that gender is in everything, that everything has its masculine and feminine principles, and that gender manifests on all planes. So here are 6. And we said, we have to understand the principle of polarity. We haven't talked about that one yet, but it would be a disservice if I just speak to you about polarity and I don't tell you anything about these other 6. So the principle of polarity states everything is dual. Everything has its poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Listen to this. Opposites are identical in nature but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half-truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. And there is no principle more important than any other. All of these principles are crucial for creation to manifest and for us to exist. But in terms of understanding these 3 days of darkness, for us to understand the simple concept of matter, we have to understand this principle of polarity. Because, listen to this again, like and unlike are the same, identical in nature, different in degree. And the best example that I can give you of that is the concept of temperature. Nobody knows where heat starts and cold ends. Of course, we're speaking here in metaphorical terms. You cannot tell where one stops and the other begins. They are completely different in degree, and yet they are identical in nature. If this gives you a hint of comprehension, that is phenomenal. Because for us, in our existence, this principle of polarity heavily dominates. This internal battle that we all experience to different degrees between what is spirituality and materialism. The materialistic doctrine, that is the one that moves us into accepting only what the physical senses can perceive, into accepting only those things that we can touch and feel. Well, that is a very limited doctrine. It is bound to enable some development, but that development is very, very superficial. On the other extreme, we have that domain of spirituality. And that spirituality is completely intangible. It is completely imperceptible to the five physical senses of our human machine. And yet, we all have this internal conviction, this knowingness, that it is there, that it exists. So this materialistic doctrine, this materialistic impulses that influence us so much today must be reconciled with that spiritual longing that we also experience. And it so happens that these two things are of the same nature. It is just that they are opposite in degree. Listen to what Samael says specific to materialism. In the name of truth, we shall say the ones on the left adore materialism as their God. Yes, they do not know it. And those on the right adore their spiritual God, and they do not know it either. However, left and right complement each other. On one side, we have that which is tangible, and on the other, we have that which is intangible and also just as real. So now, with this better understanding on the principle of polarity, let's talk about this matter that makes our bodies, that makes this environment in which we move, exist, and we carry our being. It is very likely that when you were in school, in 6th grade or in 8th grade or in college, you were taught some definition of what matter is. And it so happens that you must have been told that matter is that material substance that occupies space, has mass, and is made of atoms and protons and neutrons and electrons and makes up all of the observable universe. If you are maybe as old as I am, you must have heard that matter is everything that has mass and occupies space. They gave us a very simple definition. But notice that matter here is defined in terms of mass. And when we look at what is mass, they give you a cyclic definition. They give you a mirror definition. It gives you something that goes back into the original concept, because they say mass is a quantity or aggregate of matter. When I was growing up, they used to tell us mass is the amount of matter in a something, in some given body. So matter is everything that has weight or that has mass and occupies space. And then mass is that which contains matter. Wow. And matter, material, these two things are related. Well, when we look at material, it says relating to, derived from, or consisting of matter. So this idea of matter, it is something that for the most part we have really not understood yet. And it is important that we start having some comprehension about it, because our bodies are made of it. Not only these dense physical bodies, but those subtle bodies, even those thoughts, are made of some substance that is of a matter that is not condensed in this particular realm, in this particular domain. And we say condensed because great minds like the great Albert Einstein, they have said concerning matter, we have been all wrong. What we have called matter is energy, whose vibration has been so lowered as to be perceptible by the senses. He said matter is spirit reduced to a point of visibility. Actually, Einstein also said there is no matter. Wow. So what then? Einstein is saying here that in terms of this spirit and this matter, they are all the same nature. He is saying that matter that we see and perceive, we can perceive it because it is of such an infinite degree different than spirit, that its vibration has been lowered to such a degree that it has become perceptible to these senses. By corollary, spirit is a matter that is vibrating at such a high frequency that escapes the detection ability of our senses. And so, if we come into these bodies and we eventually disincarnate, and the law of return brings us back, and the law of recurrence allows us to relive our lives together with the consequences, good ones and bad ones, from all the past lives, what about this? What about these forms? What about the thoughts that we experience? What about all of the sentiments? Well, Samael says, a human body may disintegrate, but its substance continues within that fourth coordinate. And he refers to the fourth coordinate as the fourth vertical. He refers to it as the ethereal plane. It is concept of time. That time dimension, both in its spatial and its temporal aspect. Of course, beyond this fourth dimension, there is a fifth one that is unknown to our instruments and to science in general. But beyond time, there is the eternity. And beyond the eternity, there is something that is absolute. But let's not go there yet. In terms of this substance that continues, this substance must go somewhere. And without a doubt, that substance can also be deposited not only within the spatial and temporal aspect of time, it can also be deposited within the eternity and beyond the eternity, in the sixth and the seventh, and ultimately within the expanse of the chaos. This matter is showing so much more than what we can perceive. Let me show you an example here of what is known as Kirlian photography. What you're seeing here on the screen are two thumbprints. These fingerprints that we're seeing here, one is of a male and one is of a female. One is from some guy and the other is from some lady that they decided to participate in the experiment. But these were pictures that were taken back in 1989. For most of you, that is considered vintage. That was a few years ago. Notice the energetic field that is presented here, this radiant corona of energy that exists around this particular thumbprint. This energetic field that many of you would refer to as the aura is the vital body. This is the lingam sarira of the ancients. Notice the image that we see on the screen, because this is an image that comes to us from Indian mysticism. This is from a yoga manuscript in Braj Bahasa in the Bahasa language back from the year 1899. So this is from the late 19th century. Everything that you see inscribed in this body is an indication of a flow of energy. But particularly, you can see here the 7 main magnetic centers of the human machine, the 7 chakras. Starting at the very bottom, you can see a lotus of 4 petals. That is the base chakra. And then we have a chakra that exists at the level of the creative organs. And then we have a chakra that exists in the level of the solar plexus. And then we have a chakra that exists at the level of the heart, and then one at the throat. We have one in between the eyebrows, and we have one on top of the crown of the head. And notice that these chakras, they are not blue, yellow, green, purple, orange. No. The chakra of the heart is shown here as white. It's really the color of fire. The chakra of the solar plexus is really gray. You can see those petals in gray here. You can see there's a beauty behind this. And this vital, this ethereal body is what keeps our physical body alive. And just like we have ours, well, our planet has its own ethereal counterpart as well. The ethereal body is the superior aspect of the physical body. And applying that principle of correspondence, what is it that happens to us as we are moving from one realm into the other? Let's speak about the life cycle of a planet. Because matter as a substance, considering the idea of the life of a planet, is eventually going to be deposited within the chaos of the absolute. As a germ, it will rest there for 7 eternities, and that is the Iliaster. If you have not heard that word before, Paracelsus speaks about the Iliaster. He speaks of the Iliaster from the perspective of a divine and perfect human being. He says, the completely healed human being who has burned away all the dross of his lower being and is free to fly as the phoenix. What Paracelsus is speaking here is that there are 2 basic compounds in the cosmos that make up this thing called matter. Something that exists and can be perceived below, in this realm where we are, and one that exists and can be perceived above, which is the realm of the spirit. And it is very likely that this word comes from the Greek heli, which means matter, and astrum, heliaster, or heliastrum, means star. So matter of the stars, as if we were children of the stars. But this Iliaster is not the prima materia or the raw matter that is mentioned in the Greek tradition. This is indeed the ultimate building block of all of creation. It is the tria prima materia, made of 3: salt, sulfur, and mercury. And thus, there are many differentiations of this type of Iliaster. Some is polarized positively, some of it is polarized negatively, and Iliaster is a combination of those germs of life that contain matter, substance, and spiritual substance that, given the right causes and conditions, it will condense as matter or as something in those higher superior planes. Let's just leave it at that. So life has 2 polarities. Your life, my life, and the life of all living beings has 2 polarities. And those polarities are, again, of an infinite difference in degree. One polarity is positive and the other one is negative. And we must learn to liberate ourselves from identifying with that is spirit, or this that is matter. It is not that we're trying to reach that, because that exists here right now. It is not that we must abandon this, because this exists there as well right now, but in a different degree of expression. We must learn to liberate ourselves from identifying with those polarities so that we can learn to see things as an integral unit. So rather than abandoning this to become that, we must learn to transform this into that. We must learn to work with the vibrations of this so that as these vibrations increase, that it can move up that continuum into becoming, quote unquote, that. This is part of this work. If we could say this different, going back to those teachings of the Kabbalion, how do we deal with this matter? How do we deal with this concept of spirit? Listen to what those initiates say. They say, absolute truth has been defined as things as the mind of God knows them. Absolute truth. While relative truth, the one that you and I are most likely to understand, is things as the highest reason of man understands them. And so, while to the all, the universe must be unreal and illusionary, a mere dream, or a result of meditation, for the all, nevertheless, for us, in our finite minds that form part of this universe, well, we must be we that are viewing the universe through our mortal, temporary faculties. The universe is very real indeed. And so you and I must not make the mistake of just thinking that all of this is just an illusion, like a mirage, like some kind of of reflection out in the desert. No. We must see this as real and consider it as real. These initiates say matter is nonetheless matter to us while we dwell on the plane of matter, although we know it to be merely an aggregation of particles or forces. They also say, nor does matter become any less matter when we follow the inquiry still further and learn from the Hermetic teachings that the force of which the electrons are but units is merely a manifestation of the mind of the all. So what are they telling us? They're saying, do not make the mistake of thinking that this existence of yours is not real, and that eventually you're going to wake up, awakened, and enlightened somewhere else, because it does not work like that. Even though we know that these things are temporal, that this matter, it's gonna go away, that this universe eventually is going to reach the end of its cosmic day, and it's going to return all of it to the chaos. We must treat it as if it were real and live within it, in that reality that we are sharing. So, our scientists will continue studying electrons and protons. But for us, we have to go a little beyond that, because we know that those electrons, those protons, those neutrons that are fundamental components of the tangible matter, they are only a condensed manifestation. There is a spiritual aspect behind that as well. And so we must become familiarized with something that is known as Hashim. And Hashim is an intelligence that regulates balance and cohesion of atoms and molecules. If we could say something, we would say that is the intelligence in all molecules that keeps them in balance, in good proportions, and with all of its components adequately and harmoniously aggregated into a stable, balanced, harmonious manifestation. There are many forces in the universe. There's gravitational force, there's electromagnetic force, there's strong nuclear force, there is weak nuclear force, and all of that results in matter. But that intelligence, that Hashim, exists behind that gravitational pull, exists behind the electromagnetic manifestation, exists behind the strong nuclear, the weak nuclear forces. That intelligence exists and is the nexus, the connection between that realm of the spirit, this realm of matter. Okay, enough. No more science. We're done with science today because we said 3 days of darkness. We said age of enlightenment. What is that? Something happened to us on the 4th of February of the year 1962. I want you to know that sometime here in this side of the country, maybe at around 2:30 p.m. on that day, if I were to tell you in terms of Greenwich time, maybe a universal time, 6 or 7 in the morning. Greenwich time. Back in February 4th of the year 1962, there was a convergence of forces. What you're seeing here on the screen is a generic birth chart of humanity so that we can see what happened on February the 4th, 1962. And notice the position of the planets. Under the constellation of Aquarius, we find the sun. It was on that day that we as a humanity moved out from the constellation of Pisces into the full force of the constellation of Aquarius. And the planets, they are all aligned under that constellation of Aquarius. And as you can see, opposite to Aquarius is the constellation of Leo. So there is a very interesting convergence of forces that we all experienced as a humanity the moment that the new age of Aquarius arrived. And those two forces are the forces of Mammon and Dionysius. The forces of Mammon are from the era of Pisces. They have to do with intelligence and intellect. They had to do with prudence. They had to do with being reserved. But Aquarius is revolutionary. And because Aquarius is revolutionary, it comes to ignite an internal revolution that is heavily influenced by the planet Uranus. Aquarius is revolutionary, and it excites an internal longing in all of us, and Uranus has a direct influence in the sexuality of human beings. So for all purposes, this spicy combination of Uranus and Aquarius, it is very interesting. Humanity experienced with this transition a renewed recognition on what is the fall of man, the current condition of man. There was an awakening that was moving humanity to seek something out there in the realm of the spirit. An internal revolution that had to be experienced and leave behind all of those excessive prudences and all of that hard intellect and that crystallized mind into a space where we can move and transform ourselves, seeking once again that path that takes us into that space of true happiness. That is what the age of Aquarius does. And they, my grandparents, my parents, maybe your grandparents, they got involved with many different experiences. But the conflict between Mammon and Dionysius, they knew that they were looking for a mystical experience, an experience that can be achieved through a state of meditation. Something that is truly sublime. But seeking that experience, rather than through meditation, many decided to experience it with drugs. They knew that there was a revolution. We see how many young people back in the 60s, they expressed themselves against war, against conflicts. They had no hesitation in making their voices heard. So that revolution, instead of bringing it inside and manifesting it internally for their own liberation, it was externalized. And that, combined with sexuality, Instead of using that sexual energy to transform it so that we could create faculties, abilities, virtues, superior bodies, something that would renew us and transform us, well, then that sexual revolution came out to be as free love. And so much sexual depravity that has manifested since then. But key here, a renewed recognition on what has been that fall of man, that condition that we were where we are today, and the longing to go back to that. But the age of Aquarius also brings about a final push in this solar experiment. The age of Aquarius brings to us as a final opportunity for mankind the opportunity to receive this wisdom, sometimes when we don't even deserve it, hoping that internally we'll be able to use it and move, agitate, grow, awaken our consciousness. Friends, the arrival of the age of Aquarius indicates that our cycle of existence is complete. Humanity is now mature enough to receive the karma that it owes. And as we stand under the constellation of Aquarius, we are facing the constellation of Leo, a symbol of the lion of the law. So that law, in its infinite mercy, is giving us the opportunity through this wisdom of exercising a transformation, but at the same time, in its infinite justice, is giving us the medicine that we need because we really need it. So we enter in the new age of Aquarius. And because this indicates that the cycle is complete, that means that something different is about to happen to us as a humanity. And now let's go back into those 3 days of darkness. Our solar system is one of the 7 stars that make up the constellation of the Pleiades. If you did not know that, now you do. Our solar system is part of the constellation of the Pleiades. And that means that our solar system is not just wandering throughout the vastness of space on its own. It orbits a central sun, and that central sun is the central sun of the constellation of the Pleiades. Each one of these suns has their own planets. These are independent, individual, discrete solar systems. And each one of them orbits around this central sun. The name of that sun is Alcyone. And Alcyone has rings. The rings of Alcyone are not like the rings of Uranus. They are not like the rings of Saturn. They are not made of cosmic dust. They are not made of ice. They are not made of particles. They're not made of rocks. The rings of Alcyone are radioactive. The energy that emanates from the sun of Alcyone, those particles that emanate from that sun disintegrate. And as those particles disintegrate, they are transitioning from that tangible matter into that intangible aspect of the matter itself. These rings of Alcyone, they are known as the photon belt. But let me say this. Photon belt, because photons are particles of light. And so, let's go back to the idea of an era of enlightenment for humanity. Eventually, our solar system is going to walk into the space of these rings. And if this is a photon belt, particles that emit light, that means that we are walking into an era of illumination, of literally light. But let's stop it right there. This photon belt is a new age pseudo-scientific concept that aims to describe some theoretical area of space. This area, well, I already told you, is the Sun of Alcyone, so this is an area that is associated with the star cluster of the Pleiades. And, well, these are meant to be like high energy, photons, etc. The people who have spoken about this, as part of all of these pseudo-spiritual, pseudo-esoteric groups, they claim, well, that we go into this space every so often and that this energy invites some spiritual and conscious transformation. And this is a good thing to say. Our scientists, they do not support this idea at all. If we speak about the photon belt, if we speak about this, this is considered a hoax by scientific communities. This is considered a hoax by by space agencies. But let's make something very clear. The beautiful thing about science is that science learns of its own mistakes. And as we continue to make progress, science speaks more in terms of the ancient wisdom and teachings. Back in the 1950s, in the early 60s, Samael used to speak about this planet Earth as having two moons, Luna, the big moon that we contemplate, and a dark moon, a small moon, called Lilith. And Samael said, when the astronomers finally see this moon will appear to be the size of a lentil in their telescopes. So if you did not know, recently, 2006, 2008, it was discovered that we do have a second moon. And that second moon is indeed a very small moon. And that it has been a companion of our planet Earth for hundreds of years. Maybe someday it will go away, but maybe not. So, these pseudo-scientific, pseudo-esoteric groups have been given this warning. Samael, coming to expand on this knowledge, is saying eventually we are going to enter into this ring of Alcyone. We're going to enter, our solar system will walk into the space of these rings, and there will be a consequence associated to that. Count of Saint Germain, he stated, the most notable changes will be seen during spring and the summer seasons. And by now, we shouldn't have to say this. It is likely that you have already noticed that winter feels different, spring feels different, summer feels different. We see so many changes happening around the earth. I mean, we are perceiving these changes. The thing is that as our solar system orbits the Sun of Alcyone, it goes in through these rings in periods of 2,000 years, and eventually it falls out of that space. And it goes on a period of approximately 2,000 years inside that ring of that radioactive material, that radiation, that disintegrated subatomic particle type of manifestation. And then it walks out into the vastness of space for a period of approximately 10,000 years. When it goes into the ring, it's considered an area of light. And when it walks out of the ring, it's considered an area or an era of darkness. So it happens. Every 10,000 years or so, we go back into this ring. And as we go in, that energy starts energizing all of matter in such a way that in reality, we will not need the light of the sun being transformed by our atmosphere in light, color, heat, and sound to be able to see and perceive things. But this energy has a consequence. If the sun goes first into this area of the rings, there would be a destructive interference between the radiation from the rings of Alcyone and the electromagnetic energy of the sun, resulting in our atmosphere not being able to receive that electromagnetic energy and thus not being able to transform the impression of the light of the sun. And we will be submerged in a period of approximately 3.5 days of darkness. If our planet goes into the rings first, that energy is going to start making all of matter kind of irradiate its own light, kind of as if things were phosphorescent. And so things would look illuminated. But this energy is going to have an effect in our biology. If it affects the biology, it is because it affects the chemistry as well. So we can expect chemistry, biology, and physical matter to change. As a consequence, medicines that work today are not going to be able to work later. Biology that works in some forms and ways today are going to have to work different a little bit later. And there's going to be many of us, human beings, who are not going to be able to resist that radiation. Because that radiation not only influences this physical matter, it will also influence our vital body. It will also influence everything that we perceive. And of course, organisms, plants, animals are going to see modifications. Species that did not exist before are going to start existing. And why is that? Because as this energy starts increasing, it starts awakening these germs of the Iliaster that exist within our own planet. And remember that Iliaster are those cosmic seeds that contain both matter and spirit that will condense in certain ways, given the right cause and the right condition. And so new species will emerge, species that are necessary so that they can receive those cosmic energies, transform them, and help deliver them onto the planet itself. So things that did not exist before are going to exist now. And I invite you to go look at all the new species that have been showing up in the last 10 or 15 years. It's amazing how much new stuff is out there. So these rings of Alcyone, because these rings exercise a resistance, and they will influence the axial spin of the planet. They will help increase the offset between the true and the magnetic north. And we know that for the last few years, that magnetic north has been moving faster out of alignment with the true north of the planet. And it has been moving in the direction towards Siberia in a way that has kept scientists busy making sure that our satellites and everything that we use for GPS remains accurate, compensating for the movement of that magnetic north. Getting close to the rings of Alcyone is going to cause a thawing of the polar caps. It's going to impact the orbit of the Earth around the sun. The point in which we are farthest away, which is called the aphelion, that's going to increase, and the area in which we're closest to the sun, that is known as the perihelion. So it's going to affect that. And all of these events are going to be preceded by the arrival of that planet that Samael mentions that is called Hercolubus. Hercolubus being a massive planet, similar to Jupiter in our solar system, but a massive planet in the solar system of Tyler. This planet X, Ahengho, Barnard 1, Nibiru, they call it in so many different ways. This planet eventually is going, in its orbit, is going to move at a point in which, as solar systems, they're going to be exercising enough gravitational pull, enough electromagnetic manifestation between that planet and our solar system. And because that planet is, Samael says, 6 times larger than Jupiter, it's going to have an effect in all of our psyches, particularly because the humanities in Hercolubus are degenerated humanities, just as we are degenerated. So all of that inferior vibration is going to be affecting us. And when that happens, well, you have heard about pole shifting, and you have heard about all these other things that we have seen before in the story of our planet. So what do we say about this? Not everything is tangible matter. These 3 days of darkness that people were trying to make themselves ready for this week, it did not happen. But we must say, has not happened yet. Eventually, our solar system will get close enough to the Rings of Alcyone that these 3 days will become manifest. And it should be of no surprise when it does. But not everything is tangible matter. So let's go ahead and close this. None on the left or the right will be spared. In terms of the topic of the end of days, remember, we are mature humanity. We are ready to receive the decree of the law. We are ripe enough to receive our karma. None on the left or the right will be spared. They will finally worry about learning about the truth and must learn that the truth we seek must be found within our own selves, not outside. They lack the truth while carrying simple beliefs. They don't know it, they believe in it, but they have never experienced it. This is Samael speaking to other great masters as he refers to us. Say humanity. So there you go. We have spoken today about these 3 days of darkness. Now you know from where that comes from. Now you know how is it that manifests. We have also spoken about this era of enlightenment of humanity. It's not going to be a mechanical enlightenment. It is an enlightenment that only comes through self-sacrifice, working with forces superior to the mind to get rid of everything that is inferior in us. Only by making those internal changes, we can start shifting that vibration. And rather than seeing the spirit as something out there, start seeing this matter and that spirit as part of a continuum in which we stand. Work intensely, internally, to change ourselves, to raise that vibration, to vibrate in ways that are more dignifying and edifying. Everything changes. Dear friends, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been the Rings of Alcyone. To everyone, have a great night. May all beings be happy.